Germany intends to promote its delivery and availability of debt advice for all EU citizens.
These kind of tools, debt experts can more easily and faster identify some features.
The project is helpful because it gives concrete ideas on what is meant by financial literacy.
Our experiences show that debt management is very important, that people are not evicted and that they don't become homeless.
When people have a debt in the utility services, that there is obligation for the authorities to apply debt advice.
In the end of the day, it's also to make sure that the citizens, the clients who get help, know that they can rely and trust in the help they get.
VVK, we have about 14-15 conferences with creditors about quick arrangements between debtors and creditors.
We have developed a way of measuring the repayment capacity of people, which is accepted both by creditors and debtors, which is quite unique.
How can you set up an intervention and improve your intervention to help people to stay out of debt?
Good morning. My name is Willem Pitter de Groen and I would like to welcome you on behalf of project partners SEPS and VVA to this first out of 3 online seminars on good practices in debt advice in the EU. Before we have the presentation of the first good practice, we start with a short welcome address from the European Commission, which initiated and commissioned this seminar series. The welcome address is delivered by DJ Reinders, Commissioner for Justice and Consumers.
Welcome to this important workshop on best practices in the field of debt advice. Over-indebtedness has negative consequences for both the consumers, who have so much debt that they are unable to repay it, and for the creditors, who are unable to get their money back. This is not a rare phenomenon. Recent research shows that up to 14% of people in the European Union were not able to make scheduled payments. For example, relating to rent or mortgages, consumer credit, loans from family or friends, utility or phone bills. Another 21% of people were at risk of over-indebtedness. The impact of COVID-19 has made this situation even worse, with many people experiencing financial problems since the start of the pandemic. As Commissioner for Justice and Consumers, I am committed to addressing the issue in the best possible way. The recently adopted new consumer agenda, among other things, sets out measures to revise the rules of consumer credit. These need to be better suited to address a number of developments and challenges for consumers. They relate, for example, to the appearance of new financial lenders, new sales channels, and in particular, the digital channel. We also need to look into new ways of assessing the creditworthiness of consumers. We are working on comprehensive review of the Consumer Credit Directive to strengthen the European rules on consumer credit. Through better assessments of creditworthiness, we aim at preventing over-indebtedness. I will stress, however, that unduly restricting the access of consumers to credit is not a solution to over-indebtedness. This could be equally bad for the economy suffering an unprecedented downturn. A robust post-COVID recovery depends heavily on an upturn of healthy private consumption. So consumers should not have less access to credit. Rather, we need to ensure they have access to the type of credits and credit conditions that suit their personal situation. We must also ensure that current difficulties do not drive debtors into deeper trouble and spiraling debts. This is where debt advice comes in as a strong tool. Indeed, debt advice has a fundamental role as one of the most effective remedies for households over indebtedness for both debtors and creditors. According to recent research, €1 spent on debt advice provides between 1.4 and 5.3 euros in terms of equivalent benefits. Debt advisors who can suggest suitable legal and financial practically tailored remedies can create conditions to help debtors repay their debts. At the same time, the debtors can maintain a decent quality of life and personal dignity without escaping their obligations. For creditors, debt advice brings direct benefits by improving the recovery rates and lowering the cost of pursuing a debtor. I therefore firmly intend to promote its delivery and availability of debt advice for all EU citizens. And this is why today's event is an important step forward. We intend to put in place some new support to the providers of debt advice services. Later this year, my services will publish a call for grants worth several hundred thousands of euros. They will aim to help potential debt advice providers in parts of Europe where debt services are needed but not sufficiently available. More funding should follow these pilot grants in the coming years, as announced in the relevant specific action of the new consumer agenda. Thank you for deciding to participate today and for helping our efforts by sharing your expertise in providing debt advice and tackling over-indebtedness. Your experience will greatly enrich the discussions on the topics in the agenda. I wish you 3 excellent working days.
So, for the first presentation of today on the good practice, we move now to Portugal, from where Professor Mario Ferreira of the University of Lisbon will present his good practice about the profiling and prediction of over-indebtedness. Mario, please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Let me first say it's a great pleasure to be here and an honor. And I now will share my slides with you. Just a second. Yes. And okay, so for this online seminar on good practice in debt advice, promoted by the European Commission and Center for European Policy Studies, my talk today is about profiling and predicting over-indebtedness, and the title of the talk is Over-indebtedness Does Not Speak with One Voice. Okay, when we talk about over-indebtedness, a common definition that we use in this work is the recurrent inability to meet essential living expenses and repaying credits when they are due. Consequences of over-indebtedness are well known. Over-indebtedness, for instance, leads households to reduce standard of living, deterioration of well-being, poor health, financial exclusion, and often to social stigma. On the other hand, systemic over-indebtedness, and by systemic I mean when over-indebtedness spreads to a considerable number of households, may create a feedback loop in which indebted households cut back in consumption, decreasing demand, which decreases production, cooling down the economy, with all the negative effects that unfold from that. There are several risk factors already identified on research that are associated to over-indebtedness, and I will now briefly review some of them. For instance, impulsivity and lack of self-regulation. In a society constantly encourages consumption as ours, and with a relatively easy access to credit, this kind of social context may make impulsive people more prone to spend money above their possibilities and in the long run face financial difficulties. The good news is that self-regulation is a trainable skill, and there has been some interventions with some success to increase self-regulation and thus try to fight or prevent over-indebtedness in that sense. Financial illiteracy is also, of course, a well-known cause of over-indebtedness. It is associated with difficulties in understanding financial products and services, which leads to bad financial decisions. And if I understand correctly, next to me, we'll have an expert on financial literacy talking more about this specific risk factor. Intuitive heuristics and reasoning bias. There is a long research tradition in judgment and decision making, showing that intuitive judgments are usually a source of bias and also lead to poor financial decisions. One way to fight this is through nudging, for instance, strategies based on nudging that try to create a decision environment where heuristics actually lead to good decisions. Of course, this cannot always be done, but it's also one way to prevent over-indebtedness that comes from poor decision making. Poverty, of course, and the depleting effects of poverty, although not all cases of over-indebtedness come from poverty. Poverty is an important risk factor. And the main reason is that poor people have less degrees of freedom, let's put it that way. A poor financial decision in a poor family has usually more negative downstream effect than a family with more balanced finances. And in this case, welfare measures are the usual way to fight over-indebtedness. In that sense, the same measures that are typically used to fight poverty. Then there is research showing that adverse life events, such like a death in the family, divorce, etc., are also causes of over-indebtedness. And finally, financial crisis. For instance, the sovereign debt crisis that affected Europe, mostly Southern European countries after the subprime crisis in 2008. So the sovereign debt crisis came about in 2010, 2011. And it created abrupt over-indebtedness, mostly among middle-class households. And we're now probably living another financial crisis that comes from the COVID-19 pandemic economic shock. So we know an awful lot about risk factors of over-indebtedness. And research have linked all these risk factors as possible causes of over-indebtedness. However, most studies have provided evidence for the causal role of these factors, assuming that all the remaining factors are held constant. But actual cases of over-indebted households are likely to be multifactorial. So they might involve different combinations of the factors that I just mentioned, or eventually other factors that I didn't mention. How different risk factors combine in producing concrete situations of over-indebtedness is a highly important issue that has received less research attention. So we hypothesize that over-indebtedness may be a misnomer in the sense that it puts under the same conceptual umbrella distinct profiles of indebted households. So our goals in this research was testing for the existence of different profiles of over-indebted households, identifying the main features of these profiles if and when they emerge from the data, to create predictive models of classification of new cases of over-indebtedness or under risk of over-indebtedness. And to achieve this, we use research approach that combines unsupervised and supervised machine learning techniques and analyze a large number of descriptive and predictive models of over-indebtedness. In our study, we analyzed the data of more than 1,600 consumers nationwide who contacted the Debt Advisor Service in Portugal during the years of 2016 and 17. When consumers contact the Debt Advisor Services, they are over-indebted and cannot pay their bills anymore, having a high risk of poverty. And the dataset comprises a broad range of variables to understand the full picture of consumers' financial health, such as family social demographics, total income, total expenses, employment information, credit details, as well as consumers' perceived causes of over-indebtedness. This is just a picture to illustrate the high number of supervised machine learning algorithms that we use. These actually subdivided in more specific ones. We started, in fact, with more than 30,000 intermediate models, and through hyperparameter tuning and then through training performance and validation performance, we managed to select the best models. And finally, we test the 6 best models for their generalization ability, and we came up with a winning model. The winning model identified 3 profiles of over-indebtedness that I will now present. Low-income households was the first profile, low credit control households, and crisis-affected households. The main features of the low-income households are medium-sized households with the lowest income per capita, the lowest total credit monthly installment, and lowest credit effort rate. They have a lower level of unemployment, actually, again, the lowest of the 3 groups, and 100% of these households attribute financial difficulties to causes not directly related to the crisis. And by these causes, we mean deaths in the family, divorce, illness, incapacity to work, and as such. Low credit control households are mainly smaller households with the highest income per capita. They have some indications of low credit control, such as highest personal credit rate and the highest credit effort rate. They have lowest household expenses, and 84% attribute financial difficulties, again, to causes not directly related to the crisis. Finally, crisis-affected households are the largest households, with low income per capita and with the highest household expenses, highest provision with household housing and other credits, and highest housing credit effort rate. And most of them, 83.7%, attribute financial difficulties to crisis-related causes, And by this, we mean unemployment, delays in salary payments, salary cuts, etc. So we can now look at over-indebtedness as a multifaceted phenomenon. And coming back to the figure that I presented before, we can say that we can identify at least three profiles when it comes to over-indebtedness: the low-income households, the low credit control households, and the crisis-affected households. Of course, adverse life events should affect mostly low-income households because, as I said before, they have lower degrees of freedom, and small mistakes or small events that other families could eventually deal better with are going to affect them more. And in more general terms, these low-income households are closer to poverty, and of course will suffer more from all the depleting effects associated to impoverished households. Crisis-affected households, of course, are mostly the result of financial crisis that abruptly launched mostly middle-class families into over-indebtedness. And in this case, lack of self-regulation is likely to be more a consequence of their sudden over-indebted situation and not so much as a cause. There is research showing that self-regulation, as I said before, is a skill that can be trainable, but it also works as a muscle. And if you use very much a muscle, it becomes tired. So cognitive depletion due to the fact that suddenly these families have to deal and struggle to balance scarce income with all their financial obligations, in the long run are going to deplete their self-regulation abilities, which then can produce, of course, other bad decisions in a spiral of over-indebtedness. But the point is, it's not so much a cause, it's more a consequence. And so if you, in this case, act on self-regulation, you will not have the same effects as we would have in the case of the profile number 2, the low credit control households. In this case, impulsivity and lack of self-regulation are more likely a cause. And of course, if that is so, intervening on this specific aspect are going to have more, possibly more successful effects. And at this point, we assume that financial illiteracy and poor decision-making based on intuitive heuristics are going to affect all three profiles. This, of course, also reveals lack of data on our part because we didn't have specific measures of these two factors. And so with more data, we might be able to fine-tune this analysis and see where financial illiteracy or poor decision-making based on heuristics are going to be more important in terms of these three profiles. At this point, that's what we have. We did have a measure of education, which you could say it's a proxy of financial illiteracy, and it did affect all profiles. But of course, it's not the same, and more research should be done on this domain. Okay, so summing up, using machine learning algorithms, it was possible to identify different profiles of over-indebtedness, to predict the profile of new cases of over-indebtedness households with a high accuracy level. We do have some limitations in this study. Probably the main limitation is the lack of more detailed data concerning several of the psychological and situation risk factors. We are looking forward to measure consumers' tendency to rely on improper heuristics, self-control, innumeracy, eventually attitudes toward credit and other variables, together with the variables that we already have, and that will probably allow us to obtain a more fine-grained information and improve the artificial intelligence model based on machine learning to describe, classify, and predict over-indebtedness. So in that sense, it's a work in progress. Right, so for the implications for debt advice practice, I would like to divide this in more general implications and more specifically implications. In terms of general implications, one of our points is that over-indebtedness speaks in different voices, as indicated by the surfacing of different profiles involving different risk factors, or at least involving risk factors to different extents. There is, as a consequence, no one-fits-all solution when it comes to fighting and preventing over-indebtedness. And so the effectiveness of interventions to counteract and prevent families from becoming over-indebted may be increased if they are adapted to each profile. As I tried to show before, all risk factors have been identified as possible causes. Most of them, they have already interventions that can be used. As I mentioned before, you could try to train self-regulation. You could give people more financial literacy education. The point is, depending on the type of over-indebtedness, depending on the profile, the same measure may have different effects. And if we could fine-tuning the measures depending on the profile, we probably would increase our effectiveness of the interventions. So government programs and interventions could be tailored to better respond to the specific challenges faced by the different profiles. Right, from a more specific point of view, the implications of our work are the following. We fully acknowledge that each case of over-indebtedness is likely to be unique. The idiosyncrasies and intricacies of real-life cases of over-indebtedness or over-indebted families are not fully captured, of course, by any of the three identified profiles. Artificial intelligence profiling should not be seen in that sense as a solution, but as a tool for debt advice practice. With this in mind, we developed a software application, which is still in its beta version, that classifies new cases of over-indebtedness into one of the three described profiles. It is also able to classify non-over-indebted consumers based on their similarity or feature matching with the different profiles of over-indebtedness. And this app provides a quick outline of the financial situation of the household, including alerts and some suggestions to intervene. It could be used by debt advice experts or even by consumers themselves as an aid for decision-making. And that is my presentation for today. The research team that contributed to this work, Diego Costa Pinto, that will be with us in the focus group next, Marcia Erter, Jerónimo Sorio, Leonardo Tavanetti, Mario Castelli, and Fernando Pérez. So thank you for your time. And that's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mario. If you want to know more about this good practice or have questions for Mario or hear more from Mario's colleague, Diego Costa Pinto, who was responsible for the artificial intelligence part of their work, or get to know more about their applications, you can join the focus group on this good practice later on this morning, straight after the presentations of the good practice. If you have not yet indicated in the registration process that you would like to join the focus group of Mario, but after this presentation you would like to join that focus group, just indicate in the chat to our host Bea that you would like to join the first focus group, and you will automatically be assigned to the focus group later on. But now it's time for the second presentation of today. The for this, we move to Germany, where Monika Truster of the German Institute for Adult Education, DIE, will present the good practice on the professional development of financial literacy. Monika, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Many thanks for inviting me to the online seminar series, Good Practices in Debt Advice. Well, I'm Monika Tröster. I work for the German Institute for Adult Education, and we are based in Bonn. The DIE supports research and adult education practice by providing data and information as well as research and development service. My focus is literacy and adult basic education. Currently, I'm conducting a project about financial literacy. Therefore, I will speak about financial literacy, a pathway between adult education and social work. Next, please. Next, yes, thank you. First, I will give a short introduction in order to describe the relation to debt advice. Second, there will be information about financial literacy. Third, in this context, I will present a competence model, and fourth, a curriculum, and will refer, of course, to debt advice. Finally, as outlook, I will briefly inform about an educational game which is still under development. Next, please. Next slide. Yes, thank you. No. Go back, please. Yes, thank you. Working in the field of adult literacy was always and still is very challenging. For instance, in order to approach potential learners. Therefore, awareness raising and involving of multipliers is an important task. It turned out that focusing on financial literacy was a door opener and seemed to be a promising approach. In the first CURVE project, debt counseling as a starting point for basic skills, the cooperation between people from the field of debt counseling and basic education has proven successful in the development of concepts and materials. The debt counselors bring in their expertise in the subject matter and content, while the people from the field of basic education know the simple language and can assess the level of the tasks. The project has been evaluated by the University of Hamburg, and as a result, the results were quite successful. The Federal Ministry of Education and Science founded a transfer, development and research project as a follow-up curriculum and professional development of financial literacy. Next, please. Why is financial literacy relevant? The problem, context, and initial situation is as follows. For some years now, international discourse has increasingly been talking about financial literacy. The current explosive nature of the topic is also illustrated by the inclusion of financial literacy as a basic active schedule and essential life skill in the OECD's PISA program. As it turned out, the topic is also important for social participation. Quite recently, a new study has been released in Germany, Leo 218, and it focuses on financial practices. Next, please. When talking about financial literacy, there are various concepts, approaches, and definitions. Very many, and sometimes there are a lot of contradictions. I would like to present very briefly two definitions because they show the complexity and furthermore they complement each other. Financial literacy is a combination of awareness, knowledge, skill, attitude, and behavior necessary to make sound financial decisions and ultimately achieve individual financial well-being. And well, our definition in the field of adult basic financial literacy. Financial literacy focuses on basic, existential, and practical requirements of everyday living in contexts relating to money management. What does it mean for debt advisors and those working in the field? Well, it is clear that it's not only about knowledge, but it's also about attitude and values. That means we have to take into consideration cognitive as well as non-cognitive competences. In the case of over-indebtedness, a lack of financial literacy can be a driver. We heard it in the presentation before. Next, please. What are the challenges in the field of financial literacy? Well, there are multiple options to improve one's financial situations for students or young adults in Germany. Providers are banks, debt counseling centers, and consumer centers. However, there are hardly any offers at basic education level on dealing with money for adults. We carried out an exemplary analysis of previous programs in the area of basic financial education, and the results show a lack of competence and didactic concepts at basic education, and show as well that professional development of financial literacy is lagging behind. There was so far no systematic structure and framework, and there were ad hoc courses and limited offerings. That means strategies are needed in order to approach participants. Next, please. The importance of certain financial decisions varies due to biographic transitions, for instance, birth of a child or a new job, and critical life situations or current life situations with a big impact, such as long-term unemployment, starting a family, a household, over-indebtedness, retirement, divorce. Therefore, the educational needs and interests with regards to topic and contents of basic financial education are not constant throughout life course. No reliable statements can be made on the question of the extent to which basic financial education plays a role in the context of over-indebtedness, as no causal relationships have been proven. Causes and triggers of over-indebtedness in debt counseling are not recorded in a standardized way with comparable diagnostic instruments and clear definitions. However, it can make sense for counselors to focus on basic financial education in order to be able to assess and recognize corresponding needs in the future. Therefore, one focus in the project is to raise awareness among multipliers. Professionals in the field of guidance and counseling can, as interface actors, show their clients how to assess further regional education and support services. It is of great importance that they recognize the need for basic education and can address the topic competently and sensitively. Possible target groups for measures or programs in the area of basic financial education are, for instance, those seeking advice from debt counseling, families, employees in low-wage sectors, participants in literacy courses, immigrants who are unfamiliar with the German financial system, or recipients of social benefits. Next slide, please. So far, my remarks concerning the problem, context, and initial situation. We were facing a lot of challenges, and the question, and what did we do, and why? How did we proceed? Our central research questions were: which basic competencies are needed to deal adequately with money? What needs to be known in the field of financial literacy in order to manage everyday life? And what are the requirements? There were many discussions and a lot of research, and finally we developed a competence model, financial literacy. Next slide, please. What is a competence model about? What does it cover? Well, it structures and determines the requirements for managing everyday financial affairs explicitly and exclusively on a basic education level. I would like to stress that it includes not only numeracy skills, but only literacy skills, reading and writing. It refers to everyday life, and it is in line with cash flow. As you can see on the next slide, the model is compiled in a tabular format. Contained therein are 6 different financial literacy domains, subdivided into the dimensions of knowledge, reading, writing, and numeracy. The particular feature of this model lies in the fact that it is theoretically grounded as well as empirically founded. We do have 4 sections: knowledge, reading, writing, and numeracy, and we have 6 domains of financial literacy according to the flow of money, revenue, money and payments, expenditure and purchases, budgeting, borrowing money and debts, making provision and insurance. The competence model has all in all 24 subdomains. And by the way, it is available in English. It can be downloaded from the website. Let me give a concrete example. I try to explain at least how it works. Next slide, please. Let's have a look at the domain 4, budgeting, and here especially overview. That means subdomain 4.1, overview. As you can see, knowledge is divided. When it comes to declarative knowledge, or what do I have to know, the requirements are, for instance, knows the principles and practices for organizing documents, knows the general assessment criteria for the organization of documents, for instance, date, subject, and so on. And the second aspect within knowledge is procedural knowledge. That means, how does it work? Requirements, somebody can categorize and sort documents, for instance, and can create folders, can keep budget planners. Regarding reading, it is required, can identify items or information from documents. And with regard to writing, the requirement is can keep and maintain inventories and other records. And concerning numeracy, last but not least, can systemize time specification. Well, in each domain and subdomain, there are certain requirements concerning knowledge, reading, writing, and numeracy. It is described very detailed, and the competence model can be used in different ways as a base for didactics and instruction, for competence assessment, and also for sensitization and awareness raising. Next slide. As I said, the competence model can be used as a base for didactics. Therefore, the next step was to transfer the model into a curriculum for financial literacy with learning materials tailored to the target groups. We invented a family named Miller, of course, in English, and the central team means we have developed narrative anchors, and they describe life events of the family Müller. The learning aims are included as well, and the learning context is always embedded in the narrative anchors. The stories, events, tasks are related to everyday life and living environment. And yes, that's the link. All learning objectives are based on the competence model financial literacy. I will give an example which is linked to the subdomain for one overview I spoke about earlier. Next slide, please. And I guess most or even all of you are familiar with such kind of situation because your clients talk about it. We developed materials, and there is a story about Grandpa Manfred. He organizes his mess. And the question is, who can support Grandpa? I think I'm running out of time a bit. That's why, yes, I don't read the whole story, even if it's very short, but it's about, the situation is as follows. The bailiff comes and Grandpa can't find, because he didn't pay a fine, and he can't find anything. You can see how it is about. And the question in the family is, how can we help, how can we support Grandpa to organize his documents? And then we developed certain worksheets, how to create folders, how to organize documents according to specified criteria. And next slide, please. All materials include stories as an anchor. Then at the end of this short situation, it has to be decided what has to be done. And there will be possible exercises or tasks. We provide authentic documents, for instance, letters, bill, contracts, and so on, which are anonymized. Yes, and in addition, there are links to authentic official forms and documents. Furthermore, there are exercise sheets which can be used flexible, and in addition, there are references for teachers. We provide them with exemplary sequence plans. There are indications for instruction, exemplary solution, and so on. The materials are modular and flexible. It is possible to change and or to extend them, and all different sets can be linked or combined. Next, please. The overarching, what are the topics? The overarching denominator of these topics is that they all refer to financial actions interrelated with biographic changes and life events, as well as general financial skills. Topics are, for instance, the first pay slip, mobile phone contracts, and so on. As I already said, we provide 24 sets of various materials. Next slide, please. Who are the target groups? Of course, participants in literacy courses and people seeking advice from debt counseling materials are used by debt advisors, and they use the materials, for instance, for assessment and counseling. All materials can be downloaded from the website, but only in German. And last slide, what are the next steps? We developed the curriculum and we provided it all over Germany. Now we are developing and designing a curricular game by taking up the domains and sections of the competence model, and the content is based on the curriculum financial literacy. We go on telling the story of the family Miller and birthing new characters in a new way, or in other words, we will gamifying the story of the family Müller in order to offer and enable collaborative learning and playing. There will be various gaming bricks which allow a great variety and flexibility. It will be a board game enhanced with digital options. So far, the idea and where and how to use the game. Of course, the idea is to use it in courses in the field of adult basic education. It's also for debt counselors and social counseling in general, for secondary schools and vocational education, community learning, families, and everyone who likes playing games. And the idea is to learn about finances in general by playing. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Monica, for your very interesting presentation. I see in the chat box the discussion is already very lively on to what extent financial education, financial literacy plays a role in debt advice. And I think this is also definitely something we will discuss in the focus group later this morning. If you would like to join that focus group, just indicate to our host of this morning, Bea, and she will allocate you to that focus group. So also, if you still have questions for Monica, you can already post them in the chat box. The same is for Mario. And the third good practice of today, which is for which we move to Slovenia, where we have Hanna Kosan from Kalje Uljeci. I hope I pronounce it correctly. That's also called the Kings of the Street in English. And she will show us more about how she set up a debt advice organization in a very cost-effective manner. Please, Hanna, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the word. Hello, my name is Hanna Kosan. I'm a social pedagogue and I work in Association for Help and Self-Help of Homeless People, Kings of the Street in Slovenia. Here in this association, I'm a lead of this program that I'm going to present you today. So eviction prevention and empowerment to maintain existing accommodation. Wait. So on this next slide, you can see everything that we do actually in our organization. So we do a lot of different activities and programs. We are mostly known for our street newspaper, but also by supporting housing program based on Housing First, which was actually the first of such programs in Slovenia. So about our program, eviction prevention, we also see this program as a homelessness prevention program. With the development of this support housing program, we started cooperating with City of Ljubljana's Public Housing Fund. And through all of these years of this collaboration, we saw the possibility and especially the need to provide accommodation support to tenants of so-called social housing. These are emergency housing units and non-profit housing, with which City of Ljubljana's public housing fund often had problems. So due to non-payment of the costs or improper use of housing, and in extreme cases, they decided to evict them. So also by offering accommodation support to such tenants who were actually often previously homeless, the option of allocating social housing to homeless has become more acceptable for housing fund. So City of Ljubljana's public housing fund recognized that some people would keep their social housing with the right support and evictions could be the last option. At the same time, they realized that maintaining this accommodation often requires a lot of support and management of many different problems that have accumulated, which are connected and complexly intertwined. So, but at last, but not at least, preventing eviction is much more cost effective for them. So together with this housing fund, we started with this anti-eviction program for their tenants. And in 2015, we also received co-financing from the government for this mentioned program. So the word of a good practice began to spread. So we were invited to cooperate with Public Intermunicipal Housing Fund of Maribor and City of Maribor. Maribor is our second largest city and is also the region with the highest numbers of evictions. Because for that time we only operated in Ljubljana, we were willing to transfer our entire program to some other organization in that region. As there was no interest in this, in 2016, we decided to expand our operations to Maribor as well. In 2018, the program was also recognized as successful by the Housing Fund of the Republic of Slovenia, and since then we have also been co-financed by them. So this is a very good example, and I think first this kind of example of cooperation between a public institution such as Housing Fund and a non-governmental organization. So now our program is public social welfare program, which means an important complement to the public social programs in Slovenia. So about our target group, this is better. Users of our program are usually tenants of housing funds that I mentioned before, but also sometimes tenants in the private real estate market seek for our support. Their income is usually financial social assistance or we could say social welfare benefits. And usually they are facing lower or higher indebtedness, non-payment of housing costs, poorer competences in disposing of money. They have a lot of health problems, conflicting relationships with neighbors, and in a lot of cases also deviation from the expected way of using housing. On this slide, you can read our main goals of the program. So the program is based on the principle that housing is a basic right of every individual. The basic purpose of the programs is for users to keep safe and often affordable accommodation, often in situations where they are at risk of losing this apartment. So it is a targeted intervention to prevent eviction. By engaging this comprehensive and individualized professional support, the program enables users to maintain appropriate and safe accommodation, thus also preventing homelessness, which is often actually the result of evictions that we have witnessed in recent years. We mostly meet our users at their home. However, as advocates, we often follow them to the various institutions. On this next slide, you can see our activities. So actually what we do in practice. So if I read it, we draw attention or we support people to the regular payment and debt management. So this is also informing them about the possibility of subsidized rent. We are developing competences for managing personal finances, and we are developing related support strategies. It's very important to give right and clear information about the rights to financial social assistance and other social rights. We offer assistance with moving in or relocating, because a lot of times people move from apartment to apartment. We offer assistance in furnishing and maintaining dwellings. We actually offer minor home repairs. We are developing competencies for appropriate maintenance of the dwellings, living unit, and also common areas. We also remind people with the house rules where they live. This is in some cases very important. We offer physical assistance in removing accumulated objects in the apartment, living units, and surroundings. So we go in the apartments and help people to clean apartment. We offer material assistance in the form of furniture, clothes, children's toys, school supplies, whatever they need to for their life. Usually we get all this material from donations. We are developing motivation for personal order. You saw on the previous presentation this chaotic grandpa. So this is, we step in chaotic lives of people. So we are helping to motivate them for their personal order. Mediation in conflicts between neighbors is very important. In Slovenia, in housing units, people usually share kitchen, toilets, and common areas. And these are also the sources of conflicts. We offer also mediation or counseling in conflict situations in the family and in relations with third parties. And we do a lot of case-by-case interinstitutional networking. Okay, you can here now see our two main activities. So the program consists of two main activities. One is already mentioned, this individual support action during and before crisis situation. But the other one is called preventive community work. We have so-called community space. This is a space for community, for intergenerational, interethnic meetings of residents of the block complex, where this non-profit housing and housing units intended for housing the most vulnerable individuals and families. This is a special safe space where professional staff can respond to their open needs on an ongoing basis, because we believe, and also different studies show, that community integration is a powerful preventive anti-eviction factor. So this community space enables us to be present in the most vulnerable community, and through different community activities gives us the opportunity to develop a good working relationship with the residents of this community. And this also encourages many to turn to us even before they find themselves in this crisis situation. Here are some numbers from 2019. So in Ljubljana, we had 255 users. 80 of them were in this individual work, and 175 they got to us from this community work. And in Maribor, we had 353 users, and you can see here individual work 76, and in community work we targeted 277 people. Yes, maybe there's a question, how many people do this support? We have 5 people employed on this program, and 1 person, maintainer or housekeeper or janitor, we could say. We share with this program a housing support program. Currently, we have 40 volunteers, also including 2 lawyers available to users for legal advice or pro bono representation. Okay, so maybe here are some questions. Where are we now? What are our questions now, or challenges, or maybe results? Of course, first of all, we are most proud of the large number of evictions that we have managed to prevent with our support work. And if we look more broadly, in many cases, we have also prevented homelessness. Our approach is life-oriented approach. Through years of experience experiences, it has been shown that people who are in debt and threatened with eviction need support in several areas of their lives, as problems, as I said before, are often intertwined and affect each other. So they need a supportive person that they trust, which will help them achieve changes in their lives. And this is, of course, a long process. We do a lot of cooperation with different stakeholders, and this is very crucial. We are fulfilling an important role in connecting all relevant institutions. So we are, in a way, coordinators between different institutions. We inform people about all the rights they have. We help to interpret often difficult to understand these bureaucratic procedures, and we bring together all relevant services for the best support for our common users. For the last one, I put it out the challenge and the question that we still have, and it's maybe good to talk about it in focus group. So our users face extreme poverty and social exclusion. So basically, they are really poor. So our challenge is how to make a realistic plan to pay running costs and how to manage on the other side all the debts that they have in their life. Here are some pictures, what we do, how our work looks like. And here's another one. This is from the community space. You can see the families that are part of this community space. So thank you for your attention. Here are some links to our webpage or maybe Facebook that is more active. If you want, you can contact us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanna, for your presentation and showing us how you successfully avoid evictions with limited means in Slovenia. I can understand that you have become very curious and want to know more about this practice as well. Then just indicate 3 to our host, Bea, and she will allocate you to the right focus group, which are about to start. But before we start, I would like to give shortly the word to Francesco Gaetano of the Commission.
Hello to everybody. I wanted simply to thank you for your attention, your participation. Just this because we have worked hard to organize this event and this project, and so we are very happy that there is a so high participation. I thank in particular the 3 people that have done their excellent presentations. I've seen from the chat that these topics are raising a very, very high level of discussion. So I am very happy to follow the 3 subgroups. I will try to be clearly, I cannot follow them in the same moment, so I will pass from one to the others, but in any case, I will try to attend all of them because we are interested in all these topics, and I mean, let's work to go ahead on this project. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Francesco, and indeed we will record the focus groups for internal purpose so that also the Commission can take note of all the discussions that have been there. So we're now moving to these focus groups. They will start with a short video about the good practice before discussion starts, or although I should say we already started the discussion in the chat, but then we will do it with the group in the focus group. If you want to attend the first focus group with Mario Botta about profiling and prediction over-indebtedness, indicate 1. If you want to indicate the second focus group on professional development of financial literacy with Monica Truster, indicate 2. If you want to be in the third focus group with Hanna Kassan to discuss cost-effective debt organization, then you need to indicate 3. So we're now moving to these focus groups. So Bea, can you launch the focus groups, please? If you want to change your focus group, stay in the plenary, and Bea will assign you to the alternative focus group that you wanted to have. See you in a bit in the focus group. Hanna, also please go to the focus group. Yes, Mario as well, so that you're in the first one. Great. Mario, you need to accept.